I'm joined today by Julie Rennie and Paul Gardner, co-owners of Pentage Winery. Hi, Julie. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Randy.
Hello, Randy.
So, guys, let's start in with an overview. 2020 has been something of a disaster for so many people and so many businesses around the world. What's it been like for Pentage?
Well, I'll start. You can continue, Paul, maybe. But so this year has been all in all, it's actually been not too bad of a year. Early on, when we were opening up our wine shop, we were a bit hesitant to open up due to obviously COVID and protocols. But working with the health authority, we managed to open up very safely. And since all the Canadians, particularly BC people, were traveling around in Canada, I think all the wineries here in the Okanagan were nice and busy, busier than expected this season. So we opened up with reservation system, protocols in place, and everyone felt really safe.
Great. Paul, anything to add on this year?
No, I'd agree with Julie. I mean, it as I think the world knows, people turn to alcohol at hard times.
Okay, well, speaking of the twin themes of 2020 and people turning to alcohol, I know that every year something called Wine Align is held in Canada. It brings many of the country's commercial wineries, the best of the best, together in a competition. And I'm assuming that this year, because of COVID, if Wine Align happened at all, it happened under different circumstances. So number one, did it take place? And number two, did Pentage have any entries? And if so, how did they perform?
So Wine Align did take place this year. So what happens with Wine Align generally, it's 1 year it's in BC, 1 year it's held back east, and they alternate. This year it was scheduled, I believe, to be back in Ontario, which is where it was held. They obviously, they held it a little bit differently this year to, account for the social distancing and all that. And we do enter wine into Wine Align every year. It's one competition that we respect, and I think a lot of wine buyers do turn to Wine Align to get some great reviews and to find some fabulous wines. We entered, I think, 9 or 10 different wines this year. You want to go into how we did?
You would know that. I think we did.
So we did really well. Our Riesling 2014 was one of the top 10 Rieslings in Canada. Our Syrah 2015 was one of the sort of top 12. It was in their value wine box that they were selling, which was fabulous for Syrah 15. 15 was a really good growing year here in the Okanagan. Roussanne Marsanne, our Rhone flagship white wine, again, was on the top tier in that category. Our Chardonnay as well. And then we, our 5-blend ice wine also was in one of the top categories as well. And then the Gewürztraminer, the 2017, was top 10. And I'd like Paul to talk a little bit about the Gewürz, because we did use the AromaLoc system on that one.
Yeah, something I think people would be a bit familiar with, I would hope now, is AromaLoc. It was developed here in the Okanagan, and it's an amazing technology to actually prevent wines or fermented beverages losing aroma during their production, during their fermentation. We're early adopters of it, and I'm actually a partner in the company, so you've got to take this with obviously the bias, but I truly say there's no bias. I'd like to think it's like the Gillette commercial. I liked it so much I bought the company, or at least I'm involved in the company. And so, as Julie mentioned, in 17, actually, as early back as 16, we started experimenting it with the winery in commercial applications. And 17, 18, 19, and obviously this year we're full blown AromaLoc. We did the Gewürztraminer under the AromaLoc technology, and I think that is probably, I would hope, contributing why the judges selected as a top 10 Gewürztraminer in Canada.
Well, Paul, that reminds me, I know that the Alpha Omega Winery down in Napa used AromaLoc technology on one or two of their cab staves, and that you received back some bottles from that Alpha Omega, which is a very highly respected Napa Valley winery, from their test.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think if I've understood this correctly, you did some tasting on it. What were the results of that?
So it took a little while, and because of obviously they have a long oak program usually, but what we were primarily involved with them in is trying to, they're premium tier red wines, and they're actually pretty well all premium there, but they do barrel fermented red fermentations, open top barrels, groups of 4 of them on a pallet, and they put obviously the best fruit they can source in there, and they do punch downs. This is their historic way. And we were approached a couple of years ago by the head winemaker there. If obviously you heard about AromaLoc, could we improve the wines? And so we actually we collaborated with T&N Coopers in Chile, and because the challenge in an open top red wine barrel fermentation is keeping the aromas in, and AromaLoc works on basically having a gas tight, headspace in a fermentation vessel to work. So T&N Coopers actually developed this and this is the second rendition we used last year, and the first rendition was in 18. But they developed a lid system that could fit on and allow the AromaLoc machine to work during punch down. So it was never removed during fermentation, and yet there was an access tap to do sampling and that. And we just actually got the bottles up here, again, long delay because they actually sat at the border for a while, but because of COVID. And we did an in-house testing here the other day with four winemakers and obviously Julie and myself. And it was a very interesting test because we obviously there would be one control, and then in this case there were 2 experimental units. The difference was the AromaLoc machine, the experimental, was turned on, one of them at the beginning of fermentation, and the other test was turned on one day after peak fermentation. And when the 3 glasses were put in front of the tasters, it was like the comment was, wait a minute, one of these doesn't belong. And because it was so the game really, it was so unoaked is the way we felt. It just didn't have this coffee mocha kind of punch of the other 2. And it was like, are we sure these are all the same wine? Anyway, and we went through the tasting blind, and it was the universal answer was, well, these 2 have a lot more aroma, and it was this oak kind of characteristics a lot. The fruit was in all 3 of them. And then when we were basically told what the samples were, it was very interesting to learn because it coincided with that same thing. The AromaLoc machine seems, well, it did hands down in this case. It concentrated. It didn't so much concentrate the fruit really, because it concentrated the oak barrel attributes that are sought after when you're doing barrel fermenting. It was really good extraction of the oak tannins. It was basically the aromas of depending on their barrels, coffee, mocha.
And
Mouthfeel was improved. That's what we find with AromaLoc, that it's interesting. You'd think you're just smelling aromas and that, but you're tasting it, and it really gives you the increased weight of wine and length of finish.
It's interesting that you would have that experience with a cab sauv, if you say capturing those oakish aromas, if you will, and you have a similarly positive experience with a white like the Gewürztraminer that you were describing earlier. Sounds like a pretty flexible system.
Well, it's really it's neat because you'd know this would, it would seem like a no-brainer that it would work on anything that's fermenting, but to actually try those three wines, it just was so that the one that was the comment. This one, are we sure this one got in this little tasting sample correctly? And I mean, I'm sure that if you really, you went back, I'm sure that because we had this dominance of oak in sample or the two experimental, and obviously as the longer, and what we did find is the longer the AromaLoc machine was on for, the more basically aroma, which would, you'd say, well, that's a no-brainer. But it was nice to see it substantiated. But it was interesting. Then you could say interesting to see how even with waiting a day, you still got this big punch. The fruit, was harder to discern whether it had increased, but I think it would have to have been more concentrated, or it would have been just beaten out by the oak.
Yeah, because the oak was, the oak
Yeah.
was more prominent,
Yeah.
but the mouthfeel was just more intense. And AromaLoc, we've used AromaLoc on our rosé,
Yeah.
white wines here, Pentage, and definitely makes a huge difference.
Oh, we've come, I mean, again, if we weren't believers, we wouldn't be doing it. But and because we see the proof in the pudding. Everything we make now that we will put under AromaLoc. We don't do a lot of barrel fermented wines. I did end up, we did purchase one of these barrel heads, and the ability to do this, and we'll do it. But if you wanted to do reds in a punch down tank, and if you could get it gas tight or even close to gas tight, you'd get a benefit. It's a no-brainer.
Okay, well then let me, on that note, end with a final question. If the two of you could say one thing to your fellow winemakers out there as we wrap up 2020 and look forward to hopefully a cheerier 2021, based on your experience with AromaLoc, what would it be? One thing.
You have to try it. Honestly, it makes a huge difference. Not only in the aromas, but in the mouthfeel and the finish of the wine.
I don't think I could say anything that doesn't basically parrot exactly that. But for all the work we do to make a great wine, vineyard, picking, love of the grapes, best products used in the winemaking process, best tanks used, but whatever, we're not cutting corners here at all. The AromaLoc machine, to use AromaLoc is just like, why wouldn't you? It's easy, but why? Christ, if you can, you're putting your head in the sand if you don't.
Okay, so on that note, I'm going to thank both of you, Julie Rennie and Paul Gardner of Pentage Winery, for your time. Thanks a lot. This was very interesting. And if folks would like to learn more about Pentage, they can find you at pentage.com. Is that right?
Correct.
And if anyone watching or listening to this would like to learn more about AromaLoc, they can go to AromaLoc. That's AromaLoc.com. Thanks again, and happy holidays, Julie and Paul.
Thanks, Randy. Happy holidays.
Same to you.